All right, so welcome to the very special August meeting of the Bighorn Watershed Committee. We'll start as we always do. I'll ask Mike, just let us know your name, who you're representing, where you come from. So my name is Pedro Marquez, the Executive Director of the Bighorn Watershed Committee. Here's the Dental Poor Restoration Programs Manager of the Bighorn Watershed Committee.
And I'm the intern for the Bighorn Watershed Committee.
Hansen, our board member, Dylan.
Diane from Worcester.
I'm hired manager at More Quick.
Jim Hank, we're at the ranch.
Cole Edberg, head of geologists, Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology.
Jenna Dillon, Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology.
Jerry Sutherland, Bureau of Mines and Geology. Lloyd Morris, Director at Travel Humans.
Andy Smith, Glenn,
Jim Keenan, he's a water utility.
Jim Ricky, President of Youth.
Dean Peterson,
Director.
Brandon. Jim Olson at Visual Parks.
Steve Begley, Visual Parks.
Nice Ellen.
Tom Overview.
Danny Overview. I'm Irrigation, can we get around the West Joint Venture? Teagan Higgs, also with the Intermountain West Joint Venture.
Kelsey Bersham with the Intermountain West Joint Venture and Nature Conservancy.
Emily Downing with the Intermountain West Joint Venture.
Thanks, Emily.
I'm Danica Holmes with the Water Planner at the NRC.
Ben Roberts with the Water Science Bureau in Ellen.
Caitlin Warren, DNRC.
J.M. Beck, Rancher from Melrose.
Zach Owen, Beaverhead Watershed Committee in Dillon.
These are from Edmonds, Washington. Marlon and David.
Cats from the Watermall Conservation Foundation and from the Alberta Ranch, Montana Ranch and Rancher. So can't get away.
Mary Martin and literally all of my ranch Montana.
David Stroka, I live in the same location.
Cassandra Fuller, Nature Conservancy. Caitlin Lloyd, Fish, Wildlife and Park.
Luke Loves, Fish, Wildlife and Parks. All right, two other very important people.
I'm Ted Elledge, Associate Director of the Bighorn Watershed Committee. And I'm just babysitting right now. Which is tough.
Yeah, the new member, Mr. Howell. So this will help with sound. We'll see, we'll be testing it out, but it'll make our ability for Zoom folks to hear all of you folks. And hopefully it helps us not have to use this thing. And we'll see how it goes. Oh, wow, there's like an infinity thing for me. Whoa, that's great. Don't stare at that for too long. Okay, so yeah, like, let you all know, we are like high functioning, high tech, computer engineering oriented organizations. All this stuff is like right up our alley. There will be no problems. That's right. Cheers to us. Okay, so we'll start with the climate precip report. Okay, here you go. Which I can't down too.
Yeah, that's really wild.
Hello, everybody. I'm Caitlin Boren. I work for DNRC out of Helena. I'm a hydrologist on the Bighorn River and run CCA. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's the good. The title of the upstairs. No. So I would like to start my talk talking about our stream gauges that the DNRC manages. This is where you can find them, Stream and Gauge Explorer online. This is the Big Hole River. These are all the real-time sites and seasonal sites that I manage currently. Start off with stream flow report at Wisdom. Today it was at 6.46 CFS. Temperature at 9:45 was 53.96 degrees Fahrenheit. The Mud Creek gauge was at 53 feet per CFS this morning. Maiden Rock near Divide was at 224 CFS, and the temperature around 9:45 was 57.38 degrees. Melrose 215 CFS and 59.36 degrees Fahrenheit. Glen 204 CFS. That's a little bit warmer, 64 degrees. Hamilton Dish near Twin Bridges was 103 CFS and 62.78 degrees Fahrenheit.
Andrew, do you have any, like, stout increase in flow?
I think that's because of the rain that they've been getting through there. Yeah, since they've been getting.
I've taken over responsibility.
Did you say?
Chance.
Brazilian.
So this year we installed a real-time stream gauge site on Deep Creek near Wise River, just upstream of Dickey Bridge. I wanted to talk about this site because this summer the tributaries are doing really bad. The snowpack, especially like the Mount Hagen area, was so low that there's like only groundwater discharge, very much base level flows coming out right now. Like, for example, last year at Deep Creek, we didn't get below 30 CFS, and we've been like hovering around 15 for the last month and a half. And this is very representative of most of the tributaries that I've been managing up in the Upper Big Hole and the CCAA. Precipitation right now is 77% of median values. This map right here I took from the Montana drought page, and it just kind of gives you a better representation of where the drought is as far as percentage of normal. So it's like hovering around 70 to 90 and 90 to 110 in the Big Hole Valley. Is that helpful to see that in a different way? I always want to like make sure you guys are getting the best information that I can give you.
The black line is this year, or where's?
Yes, so this is from USDA, and the black line is this year. The blue line is max values, green is median, between 1991 to 2020.
So we're lower than we've ever been at this point.
Well, between 1991 and 2020.
Yeah.
Climate outlook, this is from NOAA. We are in a La Nina watch, which means that we're going to be switching from ENSO neutral into La Nina between September and November, hopefully. It's a 60%, 66% chance, and then they're saying that it's going to persist through the northern hemisphere through November and January.
What does that mean?
So that means that the water temperature in the wherever they measure it is dropping below normal. And so typically what that means for the Big Hole watershed is that we get heavier precipitation in the winter months historically. As far as our outlook for the 8 to 14 day, we're going to be above average temperatures and maybe near normal, maybe above average a little bit. And then seasonal is the 3-month outlook. This always changes every time I pull it up, so take it with a grain of salt. Above average temperatures and equal chances for above or below amounts of precipitation. Here's the current drought map from the 13th of August for Montana. This is where the rain has not been hitting very well, as you can see, so it's extreme drought conditions. I wanted to give you guys an update on what the CCAA has been doing this summer as far as working with irrigators and getting water contributions. Up to date, we've had 101.85 contributions from participating landowners in the CCAA. The map on the right is the different sections of the CCAA program, and then these measurements are the CFS amounts that people have contributed back into the water, into the system. And most of our, no, all of our landowners right now are below their target flow rates for irrigation or are shut off completely. And there's just not a lot of water coming in.
How do you measure that?
How do I measure this? I have and adjust their head gate or go with the irrigator and adjust their head gate, and then I take a measurement on the flume before and after so they get an accurate reading of exactly how much water is being put back in the river.
What measurement is that, 10 CFS?
CFS, I'm sorry, I didn't really want it, like, it's terrible.
Why is it so much higher in section C?
There's a lot more tributaries that come into that area, and there's also a lot larger ditches. And yeah,
Do you have more cooperatives in that area?
That's just about, we have some listed branches, the valley's
it's
wider,
wider and
and so it's taken a lot farther west.
yes, I don't know what the concentration, I can't tell you what the concentration of irrigators is in section C. There's pretty large water rates in section C.
Pretty large landholders there, yes. So it's not a lot of different people, but it's some large ones.
Mhm. Okay, anybody have any questions for me?
Where do we sit, at the Wisdom Bridge this year versus, I believe 2021 was a bad year, right? So, you know, can you give us a gauge on comparing this year versus that territory?
Yeah, sure, so like, I think Robert can speak to this a little bit, but I think for all of July and August, it was around 3 CFS at the Wisdom Bridge.
Yeah, that's correct. It's that doesn't sound really better. Yeah, that's kind of relative thing right under the column. But percentage wise, I mean, it's quite a bit more than we had in 2021. I'm talking about rough maybe. Some worse on there and stuff, like, yeah, I mean, we're not doing great this year. We all knew that kind of coming into this season, but we're doing better than we were.
Like, we had a really good spring, I think everyone had more than plenty of water to get a good hay crop. And flows didn't really start dropping off until like the beginning of July. And you know, everybody's been super willing to work with me, and I think we're not at 3 CFS. So
Let's see.
Just for reference, like the end of June in 2021 was in the like 5 CFS below. So we're doing a lot better than that. All right, and people could line, you know, for the work we do. We knew that, you know, we've been lucky lately with some of these rain a bit, but rain don't last long. And over to the system then. You know.
but I think it was so dry up in the upper reaches that we're not seeing those bumps in CFS like we normally do with precipitation. It's just getting soaked in the ground. I'm sure Mr. Creation, you can speak to that. But yeah, so we're getting precip. It's not showing on the hydro report, but I think it's getting soaked in the ground. And
A couple other things to think about too. In 2021, with record high air temperatures. Yeah, this year's been warm too, I'm not gonna lie, but not as hot as 2021. Wind speeds are also a factor, you know, accuracy separation. So overall, we're doing a lot better than we did in 2021. Not great, but better.
Caitlin, what's been your deal, or however you want to do it, for how we, you know, did like early drought changes to the drought management, or however you want to call it, flow triggers and participation later? Or do you think that's, I have to talk to you, I should have done this before, but
that's okay.
how do you think that, you know?
Sure. So Jim also was asking about the drought plan that we enacted this year. So it was combining all 3 A, B, and C reaches into one reach, or into one flow target at Wisdom, and it was 60 TFS starting on May 1st. And we didn't really need to use it, especially because flows didn't start dropping off until around July 1st. And so at that point, it was kind of mute. Everybody that I talked to about it that's enrolled in the CCAA program was agreeable to it, and was willing to work with me if things were really bad in May and June. So I think it would be a good tool going forward still, if we do have a bad 3-6 spring, yeah. Okay.
Thank you. So, my turn. Okay, I think I'll share it over here.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Over that. What's happening? Beautiful place here. Very nice. Okay, I'll give you some updates. It's been a busy couple months for me, not gonna lie. A lot has happened. I'll try to hit the high notes because there's a lot of good stuff to get to today. So I say this every time. I'm not gonna talk a lot. No disclaimers. First thing that happened that was pretty important was the Grayling ruling. So I want to just share my understanding of what happened there. And if anyone has any other or different thoughts on their reading of that law, please let me know. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was told to go back and relook at their decision, their 2020 decision over the Grayling, which on its face is like, oh, such a blow to the Grayling. But when you read into what the decision kind of hinged on, I don't know, I'm an eternal optimist, so I'm gonna give you my optimistic lens on this. So the litigants threw 13 or so claims at the court. They were talking about, well, there's low flows, there's still irrigation withdrawals, there's climate change, there's precipitation patterns, all these other things that are going to impact the Grayling's ability to recover. The judge, on all of those substantive sort of what the fish needs, water, air, temperature, all of that stuff, the judge said that the Fish and Wildlife Service had followed all of the best science and that their conclusions held up basically to scrutiny. So I thought that was really important. The two claims where the court thought that the plaintiffs had cause, is that the right word? Had stand were the ruby population of the fish, right? Because the grayling, I think, and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's the idea with the CCAA and the grayling recovery is that there would be 5 distinct population segments. And that redundancy is part of what gives us some assurance that the species won't blip out, right? So even if one population sort of tanks, you've got these other populations. So I think part of the grayling strategy hinges on these 5 locations. The ruby population is the only one where they said, I don't know if you didn't connect the dots with the science, is how that one came down. So they said that the fish in the ruby are reproducing, but they didn't prove that the fish are like surviving the reproduction, basically. They're not making it necessarily to an age class where they could be counted. That's my understanding. Jim, does that sound about right?
I haven't read it, that it's accurate in what's going on with the fish.
Okay, so, yeah, so they're reproducing, but they're not making it. And so the court was like, this population segment, not doing so hot, go back to the drawing board. And then the other major thing is the Fish and Wildlife Service sort of based their decision on the CCAA program and everything that's been done through that program and installed. But the CCAA program expires in 2026 from when it was originally written. And so the court was like, you can't count on the gains from the CCAA program because it's about to expire. So you can't hinge the recovery of the grayling on that. My optimistic reading, let's renew that baby. Right? Like it worked, obviously. Like the way I see that reading is everything that's happening for conservation, the upper big hole is working. The only thing you haven't done is gotten the partners back on board to re-sign the next 10 or 12 years. And found out today that sounds like that's in progress. All the partners are coming to the table. I sort of preempted it in my response to the media. I said, it seems like it'd be silly for us to not re-up this program and continue after all the success that we've had. I was really hoping I wasn't going to have to eat that quote. And I'm not. So that's great. So basically, like, if I read this as we need more CCAA and in more places, and the fish will show us that what we're doing is working. So Fish and Wildlife Service has 12 months. From what I understood from their office, they will use the same data that they used for the 2020 lawsuit and then just add the next 3 years of data points that they've been collecting, which from everything I've seen is fairly positive, at least for the big hole population. It's looking fairly good. And so, you know, I think when they redo their findings, a lot of, at least two of these issues will be, at least that issue goes away, the continuity of the CCAA. So I'm a little optimistic about that. Yeah, I put a quote up here. This was for the CCAA specific one. So the renewal of site specific projects is an important aspect of the problem, and it was arbitrary and capricious for FWS to ignore this issue. So then basically saying like, this isn't a permanent fix because the program isn't permanent.
Those of us who are a little new to this ordinance, so it's law. Who is the plaintiffs and why are they?
Western Watershed Projects, the Center for Biological Diversity, and a citizen named Pat Monday, who was in Butte. And there's a San Francisco-based firm that's doing the lawsuit in the name of these litigants, which is, I forget which one it is.
What is their program? I mean, it sounds like in and of itself, some conservation organizations are actually fighting. Or
They-
not really conservation.
Yeah, I appreciate that the Montana Free Press described them as environmental litigants, and I've been pushing reporters to not call litigants conservationists because that sort of muddies the water of what we do. I think they're two separate things, and there's a time and place for litigation. I don't think that this is the time and place for it because of the work that's going on at the local level. You'd have to ask their motivations. I have very cynical things to say that I'll try to restrain myself from saying. It's what they do. Some of the groups are.
So they are already.
Well, they earn, yeah, I mean, you know, it's a business model. You sue and you keep suing. And the taxpayers will cover your costs if you get one claim settled. If they go through equal access to justice, they'll get their costs paid back. And so then they just do it again.
So they're basically chameleon, they're really not conservation groups, they're just acting as such to get, you know, some sort of an entity that will somehow from that side of the table and watching out for whatever they think is going wrong.
Yeah.
Try to have the species survive.
Yeah, I mean, they're not here. They've been in years ago. These guys that have been around from the beginning of the organization, all these groups have been invited to the table. Let's talk. What can you bring resource wise? How can you help? You know, I know Ben and we could do a whole lot with $500,000 in lawyer fees. We could do a whole lot with that on the ground with meaningful projects, right? But that's just not the game they play. So, but hopefully that, resolves itself. Any more questions on Grayling?
I just wondered about the movie Grayling. Why are they failing?
Yeah, Jim, maybe speak to it or someone else.
But
Like in one. As my boss explanation was experimental population trying to expand. You weren't relying on an SPR solution, big hole, centennial, and the lakes. Those are the ones that are always consistent.
Blown them off, is what you're saying, blow off the movie population.
Well,
I'm saying their worries are not like. What they were saying is about needing to understand you.
Yeah.
the CBA introduced population didn't exist prior to
Yeah.
stopping. And they successfully reproduced for almost 10 years. Just the reproductive rate was not high enough to keep up with the mortality rate. So the population slowly declined until it went down, basically. So why that happens, Grayling are a tough fish. We've tried introducing them in what we think is really good habitat and it doesn't. And so, they're a tough fish as far as like, doing those sorts of projects with and getting success.
Yeah.
They seem to like a little bit bigger water than what we try to put them in. Like,
How much does the water chemistry of the Ruby have to do with that because of the spoil piles?
the Ruby, I don't think the Ruby has much mining impact. Is that what you're talking about, mining impact? I'm not very.
Well, I thought the old spoil piles were, when they rerouted the riverbed back in those days when they mined. That is the Ruby River, I don't know if that's like any effect on the water.
Yes, the Ruby is so a different offshoot and above that.
I
Yeah,
mean, is there sufficient water chemistry study could that be the problem in mortality?
I don't know. I know that they've reproduced. That's better than we've seen them do anywhere else. We've tried to introduce them. Like we tried up the Wide River to do it. We tried up at Trail Creek, which are very pristine sort of places, but they like wisdom.
Yeah,
They were trying to like treat it as a native population, whereas it's an introduced, like we are stopping it. So there's the different nuance, because they were treating it as a native population,
Right.
whereas like a big hole is native.
yeah. But if you're a litigant, that's why they throw 13 pieces of spaghetti at the court to see if any of them stick. And this small one stuck, and that's enough to remain with the decision. So,
Thank you.
okay. All right. On drought and conservation, obviously has been a terrible year for water. We did start, as I said last time, we would start doing, I did use a text message service to get out to irrigators. We would like to get, it's a very tricky balance. We would love to have a better quantified sense of how much conservation is happening out there. And then that, comes face to face with private property rights and whether or not how much they want to disclose about their operations. So, as water was coming down, just to give you a sense, I just back of the napkin estimating from what folks were reporting to us. They're calling or texting and saying, hey, I'm at, 30% of my right. And that's, probably where a lot of folks were at this year, was somewhere between 30 and 50% of what they normally would take to irrigate. And that doesn't count whatever's returning from their field back into the river, right? But so I just sort of back of the napkin estimated from 7 or 8 different contacts I had between section 4 and 5. And it was something like, when I just top of the head, it was like 350 CFS worth of water that was not being taken. Now, how much of that is conservation and how much of that is drought, right? There's like, I didn't take enough water because I'm conserving it, or I didn't take enough water because I just simply couldn't get it where I needed it. So like in section 4, I was estimating at one point 250 CFS of water not taken, but the river was only at like 150, right? So 100 of that was probably just that people just couldn't get the water, and then maybe did. But basically, if you run the numbers of how many water rights are allocated just off the main stem, and I did this back of the napkin, just with the spreadsheet, you can pull up all the water rights in anywhere, put it in a spreadsheet and tally it out. And I did that, and it's probably not accurate, but just to get a sense, there was something like 750 CFS just from the main stem big hole in section 4, about the same amount in section 5. So if there's less than 750 CFS in section 4, the water's only there because of conservation. It's one way to look at it. I don't know if that's satisfactory way to look at it, right? But these are there was a lot of conversations going on with the state about this, because there was an idea earlier on that the state was going to call their Toston Murphy rights, so any rights junior to them from Toston Dam. And in the big hole, there are about 50 or 60 rights of about 150, 175 CFS or so worth of rights that could have been called. And I know for a fact that would not have gone over very well with folks. And so this was my attempt to sort of, okay, just with a couple text messages, we can document there were at least, 300, there was more than double that amount of the Murphy right just voluntarily not taken, just to try to get that message out. Conservation happening, it's very hard to quantify. I think we're doing the best we can with that, I guess. And we're open to ideas of how better to do that documentation, but it really rests on cooperation from irrigators. There's no other way around it. And you'll find every range of reporting when you call folks, from, you know, this is what I'm taking, and yeah, this is what it is, and yeah, I'm giving back, and I'm taking X%. Some people share CFS, they share their earnings and losses. I'm not disclosing that, right? But you know, it's how you.
Folks that you contacted via text message.
Yeah.
Were those folks that were, like, because you guys utilize the phone tree, as I understand it, right? Were those contacts up front, or did they?
No, so I did a couple different things. So our drought management plan is based on a phone tree.
Okay.
And that's, folks are calling each other. This was people that we had their contacts in our text-based app when we send out our stream flow updates. So we have a bunch of folks that signed up to receive those updates, and we have their contact information. So I sent out a text just to the ones that I knew were irrigating. Out of that list, just to see what would happen. Some people responded by email, some people responded by text, some people called. And when I talked to the Blackfoot Challenge, this is kind of how their program runs also. Each landowner actually has a plan, but as far as the feedback mechanism, it's kind of the same thing over there too. It's like folks are calling in to one person whose job is step down on a spreadsheet and reporting it out. But it's not pinpoint, this stuff is not pinpoint precision. Anyway, I tried to play hydrologist once. It's really hard. So, any questions on drought? I mean, you know, is what it is. It's a cop-out way of describing things, but I don't know what else to say. Folks are doing the best they can with what they got. As far as people go, I'll highlight, we had a great field day out with Worthy, 2 days with them. Another Wild Rockies Field Institute crew came out. They are joining us online from somewhere. They got cell service somewhere, Wi-Fi somewhere. They were out in the woods. That was a great time. We love working with those folks. We also spent some time in July at the Butte Folk Festival with Jim. That was a great time. We had our little souped up tent set up. Tana got us some grant money to kind of expand our public appearance and tent game. That was just fun to do. We handed out a lot of swag and signed people up for our email newsletter and talked to them about everything going on with Butte's water supply system and with our projects and work. And in the meantime, Emma has been running around doing all of these things. She's like everywhere we need her. She's been here running around with crews, leading crews, and I think having a great time. Yeah. So summer of her life, and we're just super stoked to have her. She's been a total pleasure. Awesome. All right. Now the hard bit is where we got a downshift as an organization. What happened to my friend? Did it go?
Is that the implement? Sorry.
No, I just hit. Let's go back. And do it again. Yeah, go back. And I'm
Meant to go into share and select the.
Oh, there it goes. Right. So about 3 weeks ago, we kind of got some news that I can't help but being super stoked for Ben. He came to us 6 years ago. This is how it started, literally like a couple weeks in. I mean, he's at the top of the Continental Divide on a four-wheeler. And when I was interviewing for this job, I knew what I was I knew we had a lot coming and we had sort of generated a headwind of projects. And so one of the questions I asked the three people we interviewed was a scenario in which, you know, I have to get called off somewhere and you're stuck with a bunch of contractors in the field and you've got to make some decisions and I'm out of service. Like, how does that make you feel? Ben was the only person that didn't completely lose the shit during that question. So we hired him. Needless to say, it was the first week of the biggest job that I've ever done in restoration. We had a helicopter crew. We had 2 machines that had punched a road to the top of the Continental Divide that were ready to start doing some major earthwork. We had a forestry crew out there, we had an MCC crew out there. And God, maybe there was something else going on too. And I get a call at 6 in the morning that my kid had bumped her head at school, and I needed to be home. So a week into the job, I'm just like, Ben, it's on you, dude. And he's like, okay, I got this. And we haven't looked back in 6 years. Dozens of projects. I couldn't even, there's probably more than this, but Ben basically rose to the top of his field in 6 years, and he beat out like 35 people for a job at Trout Unlimited out of Missouri. So sad as it is to say, we got to let him go. They need him up there, and it's better for his family, and we're gonna miss him a lot. Sure. Yeah, so that's how it started. Just give it a second. Just give it a second. It's just maybe it's the internet connection or something. But it was, I mean, getting a call from this guy, it's like, somebody from here. I'm not the engineers on the truck. Yeah. Right, I'll show this photo. That's oh, no, I'm sure that's like it was on more. So, needless to say, he went from the top of the mountain, followed the dozer down this like hugely steep thing that they were building down to like the center of the Mount Hagen game range. I found out about this like days later, but he totally tipped the four-wheeler.
Oh, yeah.
And
I feel on top of myself. I'm a hard hat. They landed on me and I had my hard hat on, but I wasn't gonna tell him. The excavator going to take it out of the ditch.
that's right.
And then I told Pedro like,
I didn't know about the whole they came back one.
oh yeah, out there, sad pocket out there.
Anyway, like not many people would take on following me into doing crazy stuff like this and just doing it with such integrity and joy. So, needless to say, this year 2025 is going to be downshifted gigantically for the organization, but in a really positive way. We're going to regroup, do a lot of thinking about how to sort of reformulate the organization when I get back, because our physical presence will be a little diminished here. But through contractors, partners, it's all the conversations have already been started. There's not a single project that we have going right now that we can't continue moving forward, which is not a statement about Ben at all. It's just we do this, our program goes in ebbs and phases, right? And we were just about to hit a planning year anyway. So timing perfect, sucks, but super stoked for this guy. And that's it. I will stop there. Any questions for me? He's gonna talk a lot too. Bye. Okay.
Who were the people in the kitchen? They weren't with us?
The people is kitchen.
Oh, you missed that whole thing?
Yeah, I don't know. They're
Interesting.
I hope somebody brought in.
I know. Good plan to surprise. Okay, thank you. Right, I'll move on to
Wrong part.
right. Steering committee update.
Yeah. Steering committee been a little busy in regards to figuring out how to handle paper disease in Brazil. But everything right. My son works remotely and works. I'll get the hell of a lot done. And that's what you're gonna do. Because that when he speaks someone Ben, the man understand responsibility of life. Understand that his family is more important than anything else. And understand that when an opportunity comes up, it's important to grasp that opportunity and take it as far as you can go. And we congratulate you on having maturity the responsibility to do that. I'd also like to congratulate Pedro and this committee, and which he has. If you're an employer, and a good employer, you soon find out you get a man, you line him out, get the hell out of the way. Right? And that's what we're doing with Pedro, and that's what Pedro did with them. I mean, we wish you all the best. Don't think we're never gonna call you. Right?
Vice versa.
And I'm really surprised that if you walk out of this room, I know that maybe beaver tails when you're ready.
I've got one in my freezer if you want. Give it to me, man.
But from the steering committee and the whole organization, thank you very much for giving a big show. You're on that. Thank you to your family's side. To us and, you can call out, I'm sure you can find an elbow.
Let's go.
And anyone else wants to say? With that said, you know, saying, no, oh, okay. With that said, we have it's a painting from Cindy Volklow. Baldwin, living here.
Picture.
Yeah. A picture. So on behalf of the committee, when you look at that, think of us and all the work you've done, we really appreciate it. And it's always a resource.
Yeah.
Somewhere, where, oh yeah, so make sure everybody sounds it.
Yeah, or decide on it. Who's next? Canada, you next?
That's what it is.
Yeah, I'll stop carrying this one.
She don't have any slides.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Standing. All right, I'll be quick today. Paige already mentioned all the great outreach we've been doing with Folk Fest. I did just want to mention on the communications front, we've been sending out our weekly drought updates via text message and email. And this year we updated the text messages and emails to include historical average flow and the previous day's maximum water temperature for each section. So we've got a lot of people on the list and more signing up, and I think it's a service that people appreciate. So moving on to wildlife, not a lot to say about wildlife today. Our ranger program is in full swing. Chet's doing a great job. He's seeing plenty of wolves and black bears, and he's even got a couple pictures and seen some tracks of grizzly bears. He thinks there's at least two, and at least one of them has been confirmed by Brad Bayless, the bear biologist for FWP. So that's been keeping him busy. His 4-wheeler is just self-constructing, and he's using his backup 4-wheeler, which is a smaller machine. So we are trying to, I've actually put in a request to the Livestock Loss Board that includes money to buy a new 4-wheeler. So hopefully that'll come through, because I know Chet's been using his for 10 years. And basically all our 4-wheeler at this point, because that thing is just, so that's going on. That Range Rider program goes until the end of September. And let's see, our carcass composting program wrapped up at the end of May, but we are working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to try and get a new dump truck. Well, not new, but it'll be new to us from the Rocky Mountain front, and it would help a lot because it would be one that we could keep at our site all year round instead of taking the one back and forth from Red Rocks to the Centennial, which has been just kind of an issue, just the weather and everything else. So, and then if we have the truck year round, we could potentially expand our carcass pickup season. So that's exciting. And we're still waiting to hear more news on the 2 big grants subawards that we're hoping to get from the American Beautiful Challenge grant, and then the RCPP, was that Regional Conservation Partnership program? Yeah. I can never remember that. We're supposed to be sub-recipients of those 2 grants, but they've been just kind of hung up in contracting and working out all the details, so waiting to get some money sources. And that's pretty much what I've got for wildlife today. Unless anybody, Jim or Dean or anybody, anything to add?
No, I can't say. I just appreciate the state of Montana. I'm donating a grizzly bear. Taking down regularly around our cattle. I think if we happen to catch it doing something and verify it, maybe we can transport him back.
Good luck with that, Jim. All right, so that's it from me. Ben Love.
Alright, he's.
And I already told Ben how much I'm gonna miss him.
Yeah.
I'm happy for him right now, so. Stay together.
Well, thanks, guys. Boy, this is it's a bittersweet day for me. Try not to get too sobby on you guys, but I'm really emotional because I've invested a lot of time and energy and work toward this committee and this collaborative, and I really want to say thank you to this man right here. He gave me the start. He called me here. You had faith in me. You saw the potential in me. Take this job and run with it. And you've been a really good mentor, my biggest mentor and friend. And you've given me the opportunity to grow in this career. And you've had the faith in me and the trust in me to do a good job here. So I appreciate it.
We have a choice.
Yeah.
It's so bad. It was.
I don't want this to you because when I first applied to this job, I didn't even think I was going to get it because I felt underqualified and had a huge sense of just kind of imposter syndrome. But this guy's just pushing me along the way the whole time. Yeah, it's been powerful. So thank you. And thank you, Tanner, of course, because you've just been a joy to work with. And yeah, I'll cherish that for sure. But really, most importantly, I want to thank all of you guys and this committee and this beautiful river and watershed. And just you guys welcoming me into this community and the big hole has been meant a lot. I made some really good friends and work associates and everyone here. It's been a really powerful experience for me over the last 6 years. I've changed completely as a person, but also, as a professional too. And yeah, it's going to be a new chapter in my life, and it'll be good for me for my personal reasons and my family and whatnot. But it's going to be also beneficial for my career too. So I think it's a win-win. But it's really it's a sad time for me to kind of say goodbye, but it's not goodbye. It's I'm going to keep in touch with everyone. So I guess just thank you, and I'm an honor. So cheers. I don't have sound.
Yeah. It's that one thing and I'm completely stoked because this is similar timing to when I first got hired. Patreon's gone. I'm on my own. I got this helicopter. I'm just completely stoking right now. And I'm just like, and I found this. I didn't want to upload it into our Dropbox because
That was your first rotor launch.
yeah, I just look at my face here, and I just wanted to put this in here just to show that that's kind of the energy that I've had throughout my whole time here. That's the amount of stoke and enjoyment that I've had in this job. So yeah, it's been fun. So thank you guys again. Okay. Now on to the more boring stuff, and I'll kind of go through it. But we've had a lot going on too. And we've had a lot of crews up in the Anaconda uplands. This is all the NRD work and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks crew. And I had a crew out doing maintenance on all of the low-tech beaver dam analog work that we did last year. And we basically just went through all of Cabbage Gulch and maintained all those structures. And I mentioned this last time we met, but it's worth mentioning again because beaver have moved back into this reach, and they were definitely not in this reach prior to us putting these in. They kind of moved up and down. There's they kind of used here and there, but they've definitely set up shop
And it's kind of really hard to tell in this photo, but this is a beaver dam. Okay, and these are old posts that we installed last year, so they've completely taken it over. And that's just like the biggest swing that you could ever ask for when you do this low tech work. So all good things happening in Cabbage Gulch. It's on the other side of the divide, but it's part of the carport work that, or the NRD work that we've been doing. Going still more Anaconda uplands work. We just did a ton of upland slashing, erosion control. I had watershed restoration group up there and Montana Conservation Corps crews. Emma was helping me make sure that those guys are running and gunning and helping me out. So that was huge. All the same stuff that we've been doing there for years. We just had another big pulse of the work in the Anaconda uplands. We made a lot of progress on our Mount Hagen culvert removal and replacement project. We wrapped that up just a couple days ago. We pulled out 2 culverts, completely removed them, and then we replaced 2 culverts, all in the Mount Hagen Wildlife Management Area. We replaced one on Middle California Creek, which I'll show you in here in a second, and then one on 6 Mile. The cumulative effort of this culvert removal and replacement project restored 8.4 miles of stream passage and connectivity. And this is all in the Fridge Creek drainage where we have the Grayling and our Westlake Cutthroat Trout in there, thanks to all the work that Jim and IWJV have been doing. But this is just an example of what you can accomplish while pulling out a culvert. It's really not rocket science, but the 2 arrows there show what it looks like before and what it looks like now after. Excellent. Here's the Little California Creek culvert that we replaced. Here are these, I think this was, gosh, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2. So you can barely see that they're functioning. They're completely not working and damaged. And we replaced it with this really nice 36-inch squat over, and I had my first users use it while we were still out there doing work. So these guys were the first ones to use that road crossing. I don't think I have a photo of what this culvert looks like in the inside, but I had the contractors weld in some baffles every 10 feet or so to hold in gravel. So, and we shoveled a bunch in as we went here, but you're gonna have a little miniature stream running through the culvert. So winning there. Next one. Here's what it looks like in the inside of that culvert here. So we actually built it in sections, so we were able to scoop a bunch of dirt and gravel in there backed up against this baffle. That's what it looks like at the end. That point upstream, and then this is the downstream end, so you can kind of see it separated into the tree bank. All right, excellent. All right, this was the big one. This is 6 Mile Creek. Just wrapped this up. Emma's been just huge help. She doesn't really know what she's getting into, but she's out there helping me anyway. This photo just shows you what the state of affairs was on this creek before we did any work. Very sort of undersized for this size creek right here, and you can see what the size culvert that we just put in. We did the same thing here. This was a 8-foot squat culvert that we basically built a little stream inside of it. It's called stream simulation, but there's little step holes in there and little habitat structures for them. So that is looking really good. I don't know if you went and saw it, Jim, but it's looking great. I'm happy with it. And then I actually captured the first users also randomly on this one. These were some Continental Divide trail through hikers. I said, you got to pose because this is the first ones to walk over the culvert. So what's going on? Who's this guy? So yeah, that's been great, and we're going to close that project out. I'm going to make sure that that's wrapped up before I say goodbye. Thanks for the picture. Okay, so this is another one that we just wrapped up actually today. We've had a lot of good things happening in First Chance Gulch, which is also in the Mount Hagen Wildlife Management Area. It's a tributary to French Gulch, where we've also done a lot of work back in 2016, but we built 120 log step habitat structures in this creek, and that was really just to encourage scour. So the water drops over this log feature, scours out the bed of the and then creates a pool after that, right? So we're creating pool habitat for the fish in there. Did 120 on First Chance Gulch, and I only thought we were going to do 80. So I'm really happy about that. And then we did additional 40 on French Gulch. I think they they might not have finished all of them, but they got close. So we had the Worthy crews out there doing that, Emma and one of the guys with watershed restoration group. Here are the structures, just simple structures that you key into the bank, yeah, to create some scour. Here's Emma. This is kind of what they look like. Very simple. We're also creating some habitat on the side here, some of these bank attached logs, so they can pile under there and have some cover. This was like a double one that we did. Here's one that we just use off the bank, and then here was just one without any of the T's, if you will. So water's flowing down here, tilting, coming over this log, creating habitat. So really happy with this one. This was funded about Fish, Wildlife and Parks, the Future Fisheries Improvement Program. And yeah, we'll wrap that one up here next week as well. Okay, other happenings. We also went to Brown's Gulch main stem. We also did some structure maintenance with the youth employment program. We did all of those structures last year. And I wanted to make sure that we got out there again this year and do maintenance on them. However, I don't know if it was really needed because there wasn't a heavy flow event in Brown's Gulch this year just because of the spring that we had. So we spent 2 days making those BDAs more stout for when we do have bigger flows. And some big news here on Trail Creek conifer encroachment. We're going to do the 3rd phase of it. Last year we did 504 acres. This year we're going to do 232 acres to wrap that whole entire project up. And we'll have forestry crews finishing on that one or starting on that one next week. Form and forestry got that one. Also some big movement on the Eastern Pioneers conifer encroachment project. We got the solicitation complete. We're working through the contract and on getting those crews going, but we're looking at, you know, a lot of acres, and I can't even tell you off the top of my head how many it's going to be. It's going to be like 1,200, I think. In the Eastern Pioneers, we've been working on this one for a while. It's great to see that we've actually getting momentum and getting crews on the ground. Sean Clappy with the Nature Conservancy really helped us out big time on this one. So, and then with that, we got awarded another 30,000 to do more conifer encroachment through the Mule Deer Foundation. Foundation got this grant to do more, and I think we're going to try to write some private lands there. Hopefully, really kind of tie in the work that we're doing on BLM and Forest Service, try to get some good cross boundary cutting going on. Lastly, we've just done some maintenance, a lot of maintenance, right? But some maintenance on our Lower French Creek banks. Just finished that today again. But we've got 3 of the banks that we did. That project was in 2019 already. Yeah, that was 19. So there were some banks that needed some repair, and Jim and I and Pedro and this committee got some money together to get some crews out there to do some maintenance on those stream banks to just protect that project as it's still healing through its phases of growing. Okay, then lastly, I just had a blast with Emma. She's been super fun to be around, and she's been a huge help with getting these projects going and hopefully learning a lot. And it's fun to just see how excited she is about natural resources and stream restoration and all things watershed health. So it's been fun. So thank you, Emma. Yeah.
I just want to say that I've been very impressed with Emma too. Sorry, which I was spot. You just turned 20. And she, not only super enthusiastic and great at what she does, she's also a very good writer. In spite saying she does not know how to do social media, she's put together some really good social media posts for us. And I've had I've been around interns with more experience who are not nearly as good as Emma. So great job.
Awesome. All right. Any non-agenda business? Not on the agenda? Yeah. Okay, we're going a little slow today, so let's get some snacks, take a quick break, and then can't wait to hear from our presenters. Thank you for bearing with us. We got a lot to get through today. All right, grab a snack, grab a coffee.
support people doing work on the ground. And looking at a big picture, so across the flyway, where are birds moving as they, make their annual migratory movements. And so if you look on here, you can see our geography. So it is a large portion of the Intermountain West. We pretty much go from the eastern side of the Sierras and Cascades all the way across where you hit the grasslands in Montana and Wyoming, then down into Colorado and Arizona and New Mexico. So portions of all 11 Western states. We are a partnership-driven organization. We're science-based. We're governed by a management board that includes folks from state and federal agencies, private landowners, representatives from NGOs, and private entities like corporations. So we have a whole group of folks that govern our work, and they really keep us true to our core, which is doing habitat work that is good for birds, but it is most importantly good for people, because we believe that durable conservation is only possible when it's driven locally, when it's voluntary, and when it's done by people who understand what's going on ground. So I coordinate our Water For program, and people are always like, what's the Water for? It is water for irrigated agriculture, wildlife and fisheries habitat, groundwater recharge, and landscape resiliency in ways that benefit people. And so really our program is focused on water and wetlands conservation. Our sort of lens is looking at good habitat for migratory birds. But we're looking for projects that we can work on and things we can support that are good for people and achieve multiple benefits on the ground. So that is what we're going to be talking about today. Next slide. Yeah. All right, Teagan.
Thanks. So I'm Teagan Hayes. I'm a science implementation specialist. So just here to help science be more usable and understandable and accessible. And that means a lot of things. But today it means talking about some research that we were asked here to talk about. And so we're really looking at a paper that explores ecosystem services provided by flood irrigated. And so ecosystem services are, benefits for that ecosystems provide to people like us. So I'm going to try not to spend too much time on this, but do feel free to ask questions, and we'll certainly leave time at the end as well. So really, we're going to cover three main components of this work: where these places are located, if flooding mimics natural processes, and then how much wetland habitat they actually support. So with that, we're going to focus on a recent paper published this year called Beneficial Inefficiencies of Western Ranching. That's by our colleague at the Intermountain West Joint Venture, Patrick Donnelly. And next slide. So this area, the study area covers the entire Intermountain West, and you can see that on the map. It's kind of a grayish, looks kind of reddish in this picture. So that's the whole study area, and then some of the example sites you can see. I think everyone here is probably pretty familiar with flood irrigated agriculture, but not everyone is. And as you also know, it looks different in different places. So this is just kind of some example sites from across the area. We have these green ribbons, riparian areas that are really the foundation for this work and for the live coastal life. So what the analysis, I'm going to keep it relatively high level. There's a lot more detail in the paper, and of course you can talk to either of us if you have specific questions. But really, our colleague Patrick worked with some existing data. So looking at irrigated lands with the ear mapper tool, and then looking at wetlands. And this wetland tool, I'll talk about a little bit more on the next slide. But really identifying wetlands based on how long water is in a given area. So kind of combining those data sets and then applying this spatial filter to really look at where these private lands are that are supporting these natural wetlands or through grass irrigated hay. And then finally, we can map these results and really look at this grass hay production. So I'll go to the next slide. And so the way we can kind of do that and summarize historic use versus what's currently happening is we look at a historic ecosystem. And so in column A, we're showing the extent of historic wetlands before European American. And so that's kind of outlined in yellow. And then in the next two pictures, you can see the same outline in black, just to see it a little easier. Excuse me. And so we can look at that historic system, and then we can kind of map this flood irrigated grass hay, and that's shown kind of in blue here. And then finally, these wetlands. And so I think the thing to note that I was mentioning is that there's a seasonality to this water west. It's generally a very arid place, but we get these flushes of snow melt driven water. And so often what happens is we'll have temporary or seasonal wetlands. And so these temporary wetlands are really only there less than 2 months of the year. Seasonal wetlands are between 2 and 9 months. And then not even present in this picture here are semi-permanent. So, more like reservoirs, lakes, deeper water bodies. So this is really the foundation of how we can look at where these wetlands are, where natural wetlands used to be, and where kind of we're seeing this agriculture supported habitat that still allows some of that wetland function. Next slide. There we go. Great. So again, thinking about the location, it might not be a surprise to you, but 93% of the flood irrigated grass hay wetlands occur within that historic footprint. And so really what we're allowing to happen through this irrigation is mimicking some of the natural hydrology that we get in wetland systems. So again, not a surprise, but when this water is present, we're also creating some of that really important habitat for wildlife, and that can be a lot of different wildlife species, as well as riparian plants. And so, that's an important component of where this is present on the landscape as a whole in the Intermountain West.
So does this mean that 70% of flood irrigation is happening like up on benches where historically it wouldn't have been wet, or sort of making it wet artificially?
Yeah, I think some of it does occur in maybe more upland areas. Some of it is possibly just due to, rivers changing course or some variation related to that. Anything to add?
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think one important thing with this stat is that it is talking about the wetlands that are associated with flood irrigation. So it's not the whole extent of the field, it's just the sort of standing out of water. Yeah, so then diving a little bit deeper into that, if we think about the elevation, this might also not be a surprise. This grass hay production is primarily located in these kind of upper watershed reaches of streams. And largely this is because, climate and elevation really restricts the types of crops you can grow in these areas. And so, farther down, you can really get different plants that require longer growing degree days. And so I think, one thing that is likely to happen as climate change progresses is that growing degree days are going to start moving up in elevation. And so that may put some of these higher elevation flood irrigation systems at risk because, we might be able to grow different crops here. So that's something that kind of this paper highlights, and I think, we're all thinking about what is a warming or at least erratic future climate look like. And then, so again, as Erica mentioned, we're really thinking about the wetlands that are supported by flood irrigation. So really the surface water and the kind of usable habitat. Of course, we think about migratory birds, but flood irrigated grass hay is only 3% of irrigation as a whole in the Intermountain West region, but it supports 58% of those temporary wetlands, so that's less than 2 months of the year, and 20% of seasonal wetlands, so that can be anywhere from 2 to 9 months. So again, this is just it's a very, for a small proportion of the landscape as a whole in the arid West, it's vastly important. And then just thinking about, so we have the Intermountain West is made up of several states, and really I just wanted to highlight here the proportion of grass hay wetland area. So in this column, the third column,
these all add up to 100. We're looking at the proportion of each state, and Montana is 17%, which is, it's very big. It's bigger than a lot of other states, and a lot of that is also in proportion to irrigated land. A lot of that is flood irrigated ag, and that's unique. We have that high elevation, like similar in Wyoming. There's a lot of that higher elevation flood irrigation as well. Next slide. Great. Okay, and then thinking about the timing of flooding. So we're looking at this axis. The tall axis is the acreage of flooded surface water or surface water in the landscape, and then we can see just the monthly average for each month of the year. And this is for the entire region, the Intermountain West region. And we can look at just, the curves, where water is and when it is. So we can see grass hay wetlands are in green, natural wetlands are in blue. And there's really this a big bump at exactly the same time. And I think that's really what we're seeing. The peak of flooding is in these temporary and seasonal levels. So we have temporary on the left, and we have actually a bigger spike in grass hay wetlands than in natural wetlands. And then there's more natural wetlands as seasonal than there are the grass hay. And this is again for the region, but this also holds true for the state of Montana as well, the same kind of trends. And again, just highlighting when the peak of flooding occurs is when we're seeing that big Tulsa of snowmelt that is occurring, in natural wetland systems as well as flood irrigated grass hay. So just a few key takeaways. The flood irrigation we have found can mimic natural processes, and temporary flooding can sustain some of those drought tolerant riparian vegetation, and also can in a lot of cases recharge groundwater. And I will say, of course, as we all know, this is really a large scale study that is informed by a lot of local work. Jenna's here. So, pairing these two things together is really the key. And then finally, as we see a move toward greater efficiency in irrigation, say to center pivots, there may be impacts farther down the line with groundwater recharge and in-stream flows. But again, this is something that depends on the local context where that efficiency is most beneficial. But in these historic riparian areas around our rivers, there's a lot of great benefits. So I think, is there any quick questions? Otherwise, Erica's gonna pivot to some other research that we have on wildlife.
Don't put it in.
She's not editing.
Very, very good question.
So we know that flood irrigation is hugely beneficial, but I feel like there's that percentage of Montana is still, and I'm sure it's happening in Idaho and Wyoming and all the other states, still decreasing. Have you thought about how to incentivize landowners to not convert to more efficient methods?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of work being done, and I think that's where the local, teaming up with local watershed groups and people who are active on the ground, that's where we really see the most movement is, the joint venture works a lot with trying to help update infrastructure to make, the irrigation process and the irrigation itself more efficient and more beneficial to keep ranchers and farmers in business. So I think that's one component of it. But I think, there's a lot, there's policy and there's just a lot of things that I think what we hope to do is get the science out there and get some of these key talking points out to various people and really pull on all the levers that we can. Have anything for that?
No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. We have worked in some geographies with the NRCS and local offices trying to get funding pools set up specifically to support flood irrigators so they can do
work that may not be funded through EQIP and things like that, because they don't rank out for efficiency, so we've tried to do that in some places. There's some folks who are doing research on automated head gates and stuff like that to reduce some of the labor that goes into it. There's all these different pieces, and as Teagan said, there's also a messaging challenge where it's telling the right people about how important these places are and about the good work that landowners and ranchers are doing in these places and all of the benefits that it has. So we're trying to do some of that messaging up as well. We have some handouts on our website that we're giving to decision makers and things like that to help elevate that issue upwards as well. But it's challenging. We're attacking it from a few different angles right now. I don't know if we have a great recipe yet, but we're trying. Yeah.
So to dumb this down a little bit, someone who would know the difference historically between flood irrigation and pivots and sprinklers, is flood irrigation really the most effective as far as the delivery of the water to the surface in the root system versus the evaporation from sprinklers and from pivots, and ergo the recharge of the water eventually gets back into the streams and rivers to recirculate to basically keep the system. And I know that a lot of ranchers can't do flood irrigation, so just apolitically, could you just explain what is most effective without, dealing with, why some ranchers can and can't do that?
Do you want to take a stab at that? Sure. Okay. I'll take a stab at that. The first thing I would say, I don't know if I can speak to or I can tell you right now that I can't speak to what the best or most desirable form of irrigation is, because every rancher knows their land so much better that I'm certainly not gonna try and talk about that based on my surface level of knowledge. What I can say is that so when flooding happens, surface flooding happens in a riparian corridor, a lot of times what happens is extra water is applied to the field in addition to what the crop consumes, and that extra water can soak back into the ground. And based on the geology of that area, sometimes it goes down into the aquifer, sometimes it can go back to the river, depending on where that is. And so that is in a place where that practice has been done historically, that's a potential benefit of what has been, what continues to happen in that area. And then when you're converting to a different form of irrigation, what the goal of irrigation is to irrigate a crop, right? And so in many cases, and based on topography, and in many cases, changing irrigation to a different type absolutely makes sense because it's more effective for water delivery and helps meet the needs of that operation. And so our intent is never to say what people should do because our perspective as a migratory bird organization is that keeping working lands on the landscape is the absolute best thing we can do, and landowners know their land the best. But our intent here is just to talk about some of the potential benefits that haven't been talked about of one type of irrigation.
So, as a segue to that question, you guys all out there migratory bird focus. How does hay versus other feeder crops and wild vegetation compare to your goal?
Yeah, well, this actually might be this is a good segue to talk about trains. Okay. We'll segue to talking about herds then. If you feel good.
Sure. Real quick to answer your question too, the DNRC did put out a pretty good guide on that question between different types of irrigation. And it's a pretty neat publication. It's the first one I've read that they really tried to lay it out like without weighing heavily on one side or the other. The pros and the cons of the different types. There's cases where consumptive use goes up with the more efficient irrigation. Then there's cases where consumptive use goes down, like for the river, right? As far as I know, the only way to soak the soil is flood irrigation. We can't soak the soil with those other methods. So the ecology doesn't get it unless you're flood irrigating. Okay.
Right, cranes. Next slide, here's a few pictures of cranes.
Awesome.
So this is a paired paper, that our colleague Patrick and a bunch of other collaborators worked on, that uses some of that information we have about flood irrigated ag, and looks at how it influences where sandhill cranes are on the landscape. So a whole bunch of smart people worked on this. I'm not one of them, so I'm just here to talk about it, but, yeah, I just want to acknowledge that I work. Next slide, cool. So, this effort really looked at where sandhill cranes are in the West. I mean, us folks who live out here, you generally know the types of places you see sandhill cranes in the summer, right? They're out in pastures, they're out in fields. That's where you see them calling, that's where you see them nesting. But there's no actual map or no model map for where those cranes are. So this effort created a map of where those places are for cranes, looked at how their distributions are structured across public and private lands. So where are cranes most of the time in the summer? And how are wetlands changing in these areas? So it involved 120 GPS tagged cranes. Some of them were tagged up here. The data was collected from 2014 to 2022. And then we're just looking at the summer locations of cranes. So I want to be clear that we're not talking about the migratory journey of the cranes in this research, just where they are in the summer. So really, I'm not going to go into the details about the modeling here, but we created some maps of where cranes are, using things that cranes like on the landscape. So we looked at variables like wetlands, the type of land cover, whether there was human development or roads in the area, and then use those to create these models or maps of where cranes are likely to be in the summer. And what came out of it is this map. So it's probably a little hard to see up here, but all the red spots on that map are places where we're likely to see cranes in the summer. And it will come as probably a surprise to no one here that most of them follow riparian corridors. So that map mimics pretty closely where all those green ribbons are across the west. So of the variables or the things we looked at that are influencing where cranes are, temporary wetland density, so how many temporary wetlands are nearby, is one of the main drivers of where cranes are likely to be on the landscape. And if you remember from what Teagan was talking about, these flood irrigated hay meadows, those are producing temporary wetlands. So that is something that is, so there's a lot of numbers on here and I'm not gonna read them all, but what I want to draw your attention to is these are the breakdowns in land ownership between the different wetland types that sandhill cranes are using in the summer. So temporary wetlands, the ones that are wet for only 2 months out of the year, seasonals are wet for 2 to 9 months out of the year, and semi-permanents are wet for greater than 9 months out of the year. So if you remember, temporary wetlands are the ones that the cranes are selecting for most when they're trying to figure out where they want to spend their summer. And what I want to draw your attention to is that this big orange slice here, the 59.6%, that's flood irrigated grass hay. So they're selecting heavily for where these places are on the landscape. We also have this teal here is conservation easements, and then the kind of purpley color is other private lands. So collectively, cranes are really looking for these areas that are on private lands. So they're looking for those green resources, those agricultural lands, and the water resources that are there. Next slide. This is also a big table, but all I wanted to draw your attention to is through our wetland mapping we've done, we're able to see where wetlands are getting drier, where they're getting wetter, where they're pretty stable. And what we did learn through this study is that across the Intermountain West, full scale, our wetlands are generally getting drier. And that holds true for the wetlands that are in areas that cranes are using. And so for us as a conservation organization, that really draws our attention to irrigated agriculture, because that's a place where management practices and stewardship are sustaining those wetlands on the landscape. So that is important for cranes, and it's likely to become increasingly important as time goes on. So the big take-home fact from that work is that flood irrigated grass hay supports 60% of the temporary wetlands used by breeding greater sandhill cranes in the West. So these birds are just one example of the wildlife that depend on these places. That's fine. That's it. Any questions? Questions for Teagan and I?
Ed, you wanna go for it?
So all of us who have fields that have sandhill cranes, it seems that from your data that they want to be in flood irrigated areas. They're not using the water per se, because we usually see them on the land. Do you think it's because the habitat that creates, is created by the flood irrigation? As all of us know, usually increases the insect population and potentially the feed. I'm curious, have you guys done any research on what they eat and why they might be affected by that? I'm guessing it's probably the food source.
I know there is some research on that. I couldn't rattle off the stats off the top of my head. Again. No, I mean, it is, they're generally using these wetland areas for forage. They also use other areas, more upland areas, less wet areas for, nesting and other resources. So they use a variety of areas. They're focusing a lot of their foraging on the wetlands. And I believe you're right that it is insects, but it's also, invertebrates in the soil and in the water that are coming up on the surface.
Yeah.
And actually, would you mind going to the next slide? I think you actually have a little map up there. We don't have a map with the sandhill crane habitat on here, but if you go to our website, the handout for our sandhill crane science in the back has a little QR code, and we actually have a map of that sandhill crane science that you can scroll around on. Look at it on a desktop, not on your phone, or display well on your phone, but you can look at some of those places. These are the flood irrigated wetlands that we mapped as part of that research. And this is also available on our website. And I think there's a QR code that can access it on the next page as well. But if you look at the crane map on our website, what you'll see is that it includes areas that are much more broad than just the wetland footprint. Those wetlands are kind of structuring where a lot of the resources are on the landscape, and then the cranes are using this whole swath of fields around them as well. It is, I will say, it's very cool to look at the big whole watershed on all of these maps, because they just pop for sandhill cranes, and it pops for the flood irrigated agriculture. So anybody who likes looking at maps, you always want to look, where am I? And in this case, it's very fun to look at your area.
How are the cranes doing?
I can take a stab at that. I don't think anyone else here would work on to answer that. I think they're stable overall, like the Rocky Mountain population is stable right now. Someone correct me, I'm looking for anyone who's presenting here. But one concern is that as our water resources change on our landscape, that's something that could change. So that's something we're trying to track right now. And we, as a conservation organization, we think of cranes as kind of folks sometimes use the term umbrella species, but they sort of represent a certain type of habitat in the West, and they're generalists that are living in riparian corridors. And so we believe through our work, like by focusing on sandhill cranes, we're capturing a whole suite of other birds as well.
That kind of makes it consider my question, and so you take sandhill to focus, the narrow focus on them. And then I'm really aware of large data sets of GPS, GS7 marks, waterfalls, specifically by the USGS, and is there anything joint venture look at that?
Sure. Yeah, we are actually working with some of the USGS folks they have this vast data set, and we've kind of asked them to, right now anyway, look at some of the focal areas in the Intermountain West as a whole, and really help us understand, how private land conservation plays in, because in so many places, it's the private lands. Really looking at the different species that are coming to these areas and helping inform the conservation strategy a little more. And so I think you're absolutely right, having as many species as we can, as well as kind of thinking about cranes as this umbrella, we can really focus on areas that are, you know, resilient to some of the wetland drying we're seeing. Places that have like large concentrations of either waterfowl or other migratory birds, and really try and tell a complete story wherever we are. So that is the goal, I think, is to do that and work with USGS to make some of that data information more accessible and, you know, available to folks to tell that story.
Yeah, I'm curious about. I know that flooding is like you guys said, the labor shortage is a big deal, or the labor is the biggest factor for keeping that going. I'm always curious because we try to stay sort of watershed focused and at this sort of ground level. Are you seeing any, as this science comes out, you would hope that decision makers higher up kind of alluded to it? It seems pretty convincing then that like there needs to be support and incentives to make sure that we don't let flood irrigation flip to other types of irrigation in the wrong places, right? So one of the things we do, like, general study down in Glen, helping us answer some of those questions about like which one of these pastures are really critical, like where the flooding is really helping, etc. So there's some of that type of study, but I'm just curious if like, where these incentives or might come from, because it's sort of daunting, right?
Yeah.
The science is convincing, but does it convince decision makers? And like, what do you hear from Jim Stone and when he talks to the people he talks to them?
Yeah, well, I could never try and capture Jim Stone entirely, but
Never asked me.
what I can say is that, it is, we're working on telling them the story, because I think a lot of the folks, especially at a national level, who are thinking about irrigation, they don't know the nuance of the landscape, like folks who are working here and who know, like, oh, then, in this one place, maybe we can really invest in it because, we want to keep it in flood here, but in this place, maybe switching to a different irrigation method makes a ton of sense, and like understanding that nuance. And we don't see that cascade into like federal programs very much. And so one thing we're trying to do is get that information out to folks who are, looking at ranking and grants and things like that, and trying to build some of this knowledge into how they're evaluating funding for projects. But it doesn't quite get us at the labor challenge, which is really that folks who are out there on the land doing this work every day are providing services for so many of us, and they're having to sort of bear the labor burden of that and the financial burden. And so I just mentioned it earlier, there's some folks who are working on like automated head gates and things like that to try and decrease some of that work. But yeah, I think it's a huge challenge. And I mean, Emily, I don't know if you have any other thoughts from the messaging standpoint.
Yeah, we're really focused on communicating a lot of the science upwards to see it reflected in federal programs and state programs, just in terms of making funding resources available for flood irrigation products. I think what you're talking about, Pedro, is more just like human for ecosystem services. That's a big conversation right now, and we're finding ways where we can provide this information where those conversations are happening. But that's not something that we're working on directly, because it is such a nebulous topic where there's so many questions organized.
Yeah. And NRCS as the main federal vehicle, right, that would address private lands, is what I'm assuming. Like that's kind of the agency, so whatever practices are in their roster, that's kind of where we're at. And you're saying efficiency drives decision making, so flood irrigation is.
Yeah, I wouldn't even have to say that not across the board, but in some instances, that's a factor that's brought into project rankings and things like that. In some places, we establish these like funding pools that are, they say this much money is only for flood irrigation, so those projects don't want to compete at a larger level. Some states do that, some states don't. So it's really, it's something that is, we've done it in a few places, but it hasn't been something that's been implemented across the board yet.
And I think, one of the things that we
on, again, the local scale is trying to support positions that work across different agencies, that work with NRCS and can help implement projects on the ground, or at least help connect people and help with easements or RCPPs and that kind of thing. So that's something that we feel strongly about, and yeah, we have partners across, we're growing more and more positions to do that very low flex work as well, and that's one way to try and work on the ground while we also work on some of those higher levels too.
Is it fair to say that most flood irrigation is growing hay? And because of that, you get the benefits of the wetlands or your migratory waterfowl. But it's not really adding any forage, particularly versus natural feedlots and things that you can implement if you weren't growing hay. So ergo, are you really trying to use the hay more and the fact that it's using flood irrigation and not necessarily as a forage issue?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Cranes really are drawn to that particular area. The food is perfect for them. Not all waterfowl, so you don't necessarily find ducks, some species of ducks choosing to go to these areas. They do, and they will, but it's really, that their natural forage is not always present in grass hay, especially. So, and that being said, a lot of hay is also made up of natural vegetation as well as, it can be pretty mixed. And so I think it's really hard to, especially at this scale that we're talking about, to really generalize about, what components are in your hay. Is it natural or is it largely not? And so that's not something I think that we can really specifically speak to with this information, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think Teagan's exactly right. And the only thing I would add is that we know that there's lots of other types of crops that are flood irrigated, and this research doesn't look at that specifically. And part of the reason we've looked at this grass hay is because of where it's located often, like right tied up against the river corridor. And so it is, part of that sort of natural hydrology of that riparian system. So we've, in this study, then to look at one type of flood irrigated agriculture. We know that there are other ones out there, but we haven't looked at those specifically in this research.
Well, ironically, and I'm sure a lot of the lecturers here will agree with this, is that we really do see the benefit for waterfowl, mainly because of all the channels of the flood irrigation. It's great breeding areas, nesting areas. I'm not sure that they're really, that they're omnivores for the most part, most of the species, but I don't think they're really getting the benefit of the hay per se, but the infrastructure of the different channels and things are a big benefit. And I think that spilled over into, the rivers and other areas so they can get a better feeding area. So I think net is a great benefit, but the fact that, you're focusing on the hay versus, the flood irrigation, I think your messaging is really, it's not the habitat of the wetlands versus the actual particular grasses.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's something that actually Emily and I were just talking about this, because it is, we're talking about the specific type of flood irrigation because of where it's often located. But from our perspective, we're really thinking about where the water is. It's that act of spreading out that surface water in the riparian core that we're talking about in terms of the habitat benefits. And then when we step down to species, like Teagan said, the cranes, that vegetation becomes an important part of it, but really we're talking about the flooding overall.
Follow-up questions?
You all asleep now?
It's an early night.
You'll find out, like where I live up there, my meadow up there, the irrigating that, but there were certain places on that meadow that were swamp.
Mm-hmm.
And when you drive that up, so you go hay and the cranes would go in the swamp. Because if you got into it, you might get stuck. That's right. Great.
Awesome, everybody. Oh, Jim, you got more?
I think we have a real challenge west. You know, we took the water out of the river and put on the land, and now the value of the water is getting to the point where it's gonna be unmanageable. It's very, gonna be very difficult to keep the water, on the land because of the money involved in regards to urban area and the cash crops down the road. And, I think that's going to be very difficult. If you look at southeastern United States and these and so everyone's doing fishing. Because if you don't spread it out, you don't have any groundwater recharge.
So, thanks to all y'all that are still flood irrigating. Hope you keep it up. You're like the 3%ers now? It's the 2.5%ers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, 2.5% of you are even up for wetlands, so it's pretty important.
Good segue for your next presentation on cloud seeding.
All right, well, how about a big hand? Is September 18th,
Cloud seeding.
and it is cloud seeding. Perfect season. Making clouds, not no crayons. Thanks everybody for coming, great turnout.